Okay, greetings and welcome to another Grenfell MediaWatch update. Today's edition is called A Trough of Blood. And I want to start with the police investigation. Now, we've been told by the police, they've announced that they've actually forwarded the case against the men involved in the burning effigy incident to the CPS. So it's up to them to decide whether they're going to charge. But the police have also told us that they're waiting for another £3 million from the government for their investigation into the massacre itself. Now, they've already received 22 million, let's be clear about this. But the government's holding back on another 3 million, saying that the police should fund this themselves. I mean, let's be clear, an investigation that costs over £20 million, regardless of the government funds an extra 3 million, we expect some serious results. And that means something beyond just charging the some idiots who burnt a cardboard effigy. Anyway, what do I know? I mean, the government has actually announced that it's going to pay £100,000 to someone to manage the Grenfell site. A lot of people are making money out of this. I think Kensington and Chelsea Council have announced that they spent £2.5 million on legal costs. And they're arguing that this is actually value for money. Again, a lot of people are making cash out of this. A lot of people are feeding off that trough. I mean, let's be honest. So far, the only group that has faced intense scrutiny is the London Fire Brigade. Now, the Channel 4 documentary, Did the Fire Brigade Fail?, was very difficult to watch, especially the parts where Danny Cotton was repeating those comments that she wouldn't have changed a single thing. And it's been quite sad to hear that she's saying that again, even now, having time to reflect on her comments to the inquiry. Now, while the London Fire Brigade may have a role to play and have questions to answer when it comes to the lack of robust and competent safety plans for fire procedures in the event of such a disaster, and I'm talking about a cladding-based fire disaster, they are not responsible for placing the cladding on Grenfell in the first place. So let's talk about the cladding situation. We now know that there are over 50 buildings in the private sector where landlords or owners are refusing to remove the cladding, and the government's doing nothing about it. This is despite many people making claims, legal claims, that actually it is the government's responsibility. I mean, I believe they've got a moral responsibility if they didn't have a legal one. But that's where the situation stands right now. We also know that Judith Hackett, do you remember her? She went and did this report into what should be changed in the building industry. She's actually in Australia right now. There was a fire over there on the 4th of February. It's only a few weeks ago. And it was cladding fueled. It's very similar to what happened in Grenfell. And she's now telling people it is urgent that you remove this cladding from your buildings. This is in Australia. Also, we keep seeing reports in the media that the government knew years ago about the dangers of flammable cladding, but failed to act. It just didn't do anything about it. They can't feign ignorance. They knew. This is where I'd rather that 22 million or 23 million or whatever it is investigation was looking into. Not just the London Fire Brigade, but the acts of ministers, of councillors, of builders, of regulators. What was their role in this atrocity? And they clearly had a role. They clearly had culpability. They were negligent. Some of them willfully. Some of them, and many of them, putting profit before people. And if you want to know why this is important, why the actions of the Grenfell community who continue to fight, not just for themselves and justice for their own bereavements, but for others all up and down the country. Well, look what happened in Portsmouth. The government stripped down some cladding on some of the tower blocks, and they found out that actually to repair the structural integrity of those buildings would cost something like £86 million. And so they're going to rip the buildings down instead. Now, what becomes rapidly apparent is that when cladding has been applied, it's not simply just for a decorative purpose, just to make things look pretty, but also to cover and mask structural integrity failings of buildings. How many more buildings, once the cladding's been removed, will we find out have also got defects? So if there is some good news about the cladding situation, well, Arconic, that's one of the buildings that provided components for the cladding, their multi-billion-pound buyout has actually fallen through. Now, Arconic, as you may recall, they knew that the components they were supplying for the cladding had failed regulatory tests as early as 2014. So again, what is this investigation looking at? Because there's a long chain of people, a long chain of organisations, a long chain that needs to really be robustly investigated, and many people who need to be brought to account. Now, seeing that we're called Grenfell MediaWatch, let me share a little bit of focus on what the media's doing or absolutely not doing. I'm sure you've probably noticed the lack of attention when it comes to covering Grenfell in favour of oversaturation on Brexit. So there was a story about a choir master and his role in the school that lies underneath Grenfell in actually helping the children use song to heal. And while these are good stories, I've got a little wary and a little concern about the way the media's gone back to its default celebrity focus on stories. So rather than actually talking about the subjects of the stories anymore, many news organisations are using these pieces to promote celebrity culture. And what do I mean by that? Well, there's a story about the prince going to schools telling children that they're going to do good in their life. Whereas the subjects or the people who should be at the centre of the story are now being relegated as adornments for a puff piece on celebrity. There was a story on ITV about Anton Deck, and again, it mentions Grenfell, but it's really a puff piece, a promotional piece about these two so-called celebrities. I don't know about you, but I'm not really interested in these stories. What I am interested in is really stories like the Justice for Grenfell campaign at the launch of London Fashion Week. And this didn't receive the media coverage it should have done. That's in our opinion. This was a piece that, some fashion magazines focused around the models and the singers and the DJs, and I commend them as well for being involved. But there was also a focus on the story. There's a fantastic video, a YouTube video, if you've got a chance, it's like 4 minutes long, please go and watch it, which gives voice to the concerns of the community. The focus is on their pain, their suffering, their campaign for justice, and what they're also doing to make sure that everyone else in the UK who lives in similar circumstances with cladding around their buildings are safe. These are the kind of stories, and this is the way that the media should be focused when it's reporting situations such like this. Not a focus on so-called celebrities. The celebrities are the vehicles to actually get into these publications, but the journalists must have the moral integrity to say, well, actually, let me hear and give weight or give a voice to the voiceless, those that we don't hear from. So in closing, where are we? Well, of the 202 families that were immediately affected in the aftermath, around 23 are still not living in permanent housing, and this really is outrageous. Now, the silent walk is taking place on the 14th of every month, and support is growing. It's a nationwide campaign now. At the last event, there was some guy who's going to walk hundreds of miles to help raise awareness on a kind of sponsored walk, and that's fantastic. But while the campaign is moving forward, people are making sure that their calls for justice are being heard, the council is trying to sneak out through the back door. Last week, we found out it's going to be the last week of the Grenfell support newsletter. Instead, the council is going to start publishing a magazine called North Ken News, sort of North Kensington News. But we must never forget, and must never allow them to make us voiceless. So I'm going to close, as ever, and say, may the ancestors continue to guide and protect us. Ashe.